Welcome in to Husker Max today, March 10th, 2025. I'm Kaleb Henry alongside Nick Handley. It was a rough weekend for a couple of Husker men's sports. Not everybody, mind you. You had some success with Husker wrestling at the Big Ten Championships, a couple of champions there. Softball, not a men's sport, swept their weekend out at Bullen Stadium. They apparently sucked up all of the success that was happening around Haymarket Park. Nebraska men's basketball struggled, limped to the finish line of the regular season. We'll look at the Iowa game as well as just kind of the last few weeks and where things are for Fred Hoiberg's program. Headed into a big March with the transfer portal opening at the end of the month, and this next week finding out what postseason destination that will be. Are you guys all in, all out on the Husker games? We'll discuss that a little bit later, and some connections to some mid-major programs on the basketball side have us happy for a couple of them. Not just our friends in Omaha. We'll talk about, of course, our friends in Omaha. Happy for them. Happy for Gary Sharp getting to be on that call, and for a guy I've known for a long time, Joe Potts, Southern Illinois, Edwardsville, getting to be on a call of the Ohio Valley Conference Championship. So we'll get a little mid-major talk coming up as well. But we have to start with the Power Conference program here in the state, here in Lincoln. And Nebraska men's basketball lost 5 straight to close out the regular season. Constantly, every week, it was win this one and you're a near lock to the NCAA tournament. Win this one and you're keeping yourself on the bubble. Win this one and you're in the Big Ten tournament. LLL. Each time did not rise to the challenge. You had different players, it seemed, rose in different ways. Bryce Williams had 43 points just the other night. Juwan Gary goes out on senior day with a hell of a 24 points in 28 minutes. But ultimately, it's a loss to Iowa. And it was a win, and you're in, lose, and you're out situation for both teams. Iowa sneaks in to the Big Ten tournament. Nebraska, because of a 5-way tie for 12th, falls all the way to 16th. 16, 17, and 18, not headed to Indianapolis. Nebraska right there with Penn State and Washington on the outside and just sitting there while 15 of your buddies go hang out in Indianapolis for the week and play basketball. I was at Pinnacle Bank Arena. It was very sad for the last couple of minutes of the game. Nick, I know you were at baseball and handling that, but what you were able to take in, what were your impressions of the basketball game yesterday?
I don't know how you begin this conversation, assessment, analysis, however you want to put it, without using the word disappointment. And that's just everything that Nebraska got to this point of, you're right. We're a week and a half ago thinking, as bad as it was getting, that if you could just beat Ohio State, that, well, first of all, you're in the Big Ten tournament. You prolong those opportunities to qualify for the NCAA tournament as an at-large team. We said this the last time you and I talked on Thursday. It always felt like the committee, I shouldn't say the committee, but the bracketologists wanted any reason to give Nebraska the benefit of the doubt. They just like, well, if they beat Iowa and then they could win maybe on that first day, that Wednesday in the Big Ten tournament, maybe that could be enough. And you and I and other people are probably wondering, really? That's all? So it always seemed like the bracketologists really looked at some of those quad one wins and some of those big wins, especially early on in the season, that could mask some of the deficiencies down the stretch for this Nebraska basketball team. So it's disappointing that with all the emotion that goes into senior day, with all the emotion that you would expect, that sense of urgency, or we talked about, where we wanted to see Nebraska play like that team that we kept saying Nebraska was going to be up against, when Nebraska is going to be playing a desperate Ohio State team. Nebraska is going to be playing a desperate Iowa team that are trying to get into the Big Ten tournament. We wanted to see Nebraska be that desperate team. We wanted to see Nebraska have that label on the other team's scouting report. And early on, you're thinking, okay, 9-2, Sammy Hoiberg hits a 3. You're like, all right, this is what it's supposed to look like. And that was just a distant memory. I mean, I think a lot of people who watched that game, because I ended up watching, I don't know why. I came back home just because I wanted to see how it went, because we're tracking the game. We had the game on up in the score or up in the press box in baseball, but you're glancing at it every now and then.
Yeah.
At one point, I'm seeing 9-2, and then just like that, all of a sudden Iowa's got the lead, and it, up until maybe the last 6 minutes of the first half, it was somewhat tight, but to see everything unfold, I think now that you watch 40 minutes of that basketball game, you forget that Nebraska actually had a 7-point lead right out of the gate. And it seemed like Iowa offensively could do anything they wanted to do. And I go back to disappointment, Caleb, because if there was one thing that this team seemed to really have an identity with, was their defense, their ability to close out, their ability to rotate, their ability to at least provide some very tough contested shots. Now, give Iowa credit. There was a lot of just catch and shoot moments for them.
Mm-hmm.
And those shots were falling. And sometimes those shots are not going to fall. But man, just that part of it defensively to me was more than anything disappointing. Now, we could talk about the inability offensively. See, that's the thing too. I'm not as disappointed with the offense because, Caleb, we know there's limitations there. And so it's tough to just absolutely go ballistic on the offense. But then you could factor in, okay, there are numerous double teams on Bryce Williams. And Fred even said this after the game, and he's absolutely right. You're in 4-on-3 situations where you've got to be able to create offense that way. When they're taking two guys or taking one guy out, you've got the numbers. How are you not able to be more effective offensively? But unfortunately, that's been the bugaboo of this team.
The expectations were low on offense.
Yeah.
They were low, and there's no doubt about that. Yes, started hot from three. Hit the first 3 out of 4 because Juwan Gary goes 2 for 2 to open it up, and you're going, oh, awesome, you're hitting from threes. Here's where I was nervous, even with Gary hitting those, is that if Juwan Gary hits one to start, he falls in love a little bit. And the team fell in love a little bit. Started out 3 for 4, missed the next 10. And while you're not getting anything offensively, Iowa's offense, on the other end, constant movement, constantly driving into the gaps, kicking it out to somebody, swinging it around. There's always movement. The ball never seemed to get stuck on the Hawkeye end of the floor. How often with Nebraska's offense does the ball just get stuck?
Yeah.
And it's because of its design that there's not a true point guard. There's not somebody breaking it down and kicking it out to shooters constantly. You don't have for as great as what you got from Juwan yesterday, and for what is great as you got for Bryce, especially over the last 2 months. And Connor Essegian actually shot the 3 at a decent clip, and Sam Hoiberg shot the 3 at a decent clip. You just don't have that consistently from everyone across the board. Berke hit a 3 yesterday too. He finally got, a little bit like we talk about the bracketologists wanting Nebraska as a team to show a little bit of a pulse. Berke showed up that he still had a pulse after a not great stretch of games coming back from injury. But it was you just didn't have that entire effort and energy in a must win. You didn't have that feeling of back against the wall, everyone is all in at all points. And you saw that with Nebraska's opponents. You saw it with Minnesota. You saw it with Ohio State. And you saw it with Iowa on what is potentially the final regular season game of Fran McCaffrey's tenure at Iowa. He's playing his way out of Iowa City, but still comes into Lincoln and has it like it was a no-doubter. It wasn't close at the end. You weren't really shooting free throws saying, can we cut into this lead? It was over. And so you compound Sunday where 7 guys walked, 6 seniors, and then a junior, a fourth-year guy in Jeffrey Grace. And so we'll see what happens with the transfer portal. I think he got in yesterday, but going into yesterday, he played 44 minutes over 37 games in 3 years in Lincoln. And Fred Hoiberg has talked about Grace a couple of times, specifically leading into Sunday, where he said that is the voice in the locker room. That is one of the leaders on the team. So we'll see where that leadership there's that part of being part of that team and being that leader, but also, I mean, if you're a competitor, you kind of want to play. So I'm not going to blame any decisions that Jeffrey Grace makes in the next month. I'm not going to be upset with him for any of that. But you have 6 other guys that aren't coming back next year, Nick.
Yeah.
And the transfer portal opens up in 2 weeks. And we still don't know Nebraska's NIT or college basketball crown destination. We'll find that out along with Selection Sunday. But this is a massive, massive offseason for Fred Hoiberg and company, because we'll get ahead of this part. He's not getting fired.
No, and he shouldn't be.
He's coming back. He just had it was overall. You compare where his first 3 years were to his last 3 years. He's coming back. There's that conversation. That's all we need to say about that. So now it turns to, what does the offseason look like? Big, big, big transfer portal and offseason, and you have to have hits this year. You cannot have one hit and half a hit and then a bunch of misses. You got to have hits this year.
And I'm glad you brought up the let's get the cat out of the bag on the whole fire. There's always going to be the fire everybody crowd. Okay, and this is I think such a very complex topic when it comes to Nebraska basketball. And for the record, I am 100% with you. Nebraska, in my opinion, still has the right coach. I think there are so many things that Fred represents, both as a tactician on the floor, a basketball guy, his demeanor. There are a lot of things that I like about what Fred brings, but also representation of this program as a steward of the athletic department. And I know that maybe doesn't mean a lot to everybody, but there are a lot of things that I think, as far as boxes, that I think Fred checks. Now, I do want, but it's fair. Criticism is fair when things do not go your way, especially when you have a massive collapse down the stretch.
Yes.
Fred's going to be the first one to tell you that it starts with him. Okay. And we understand that. I mean, the head coach, you're the one making the money. You're the one that is pushing all the buttons. You're trying to get the most out of your team. You and I have had this conversation over the last couple of months of, at some point, there's only so much as a coach you could say to your team. And the thing is, we've all seen it with our eyes early in the year. This team had a lot more to offer than what we saw down the stretch. Is that guys running out of gas on this thing? Whatever the issue, the main issue was, I don't think there was just one thing. So it is up to Fred. It is up to that coaching staff to figure it out. It is up to them to really go back over how they're identifying talent, how they are able to bring guys in, what type of players are they bringing in. Now, I want to give a big shout out and a lot of credit to Tom Chattel, because if anybody read his column last night about what Troy Dannon, his role in all of this is going to be, and I think anytime you see anything that has to do with Troy Dannon's decision on basketball, people are like, should he fire him? No. And that's not what Tom is writing either. But Tom
decision doesn't always mean a move. Absolutely.
And Troy, I think, does have a very interesting dilemma when it does come to men's basketball. I'll get to this point. I have to go through the weeds on this one a little bit here, because there are varying perspectives when it comes to Nebraska basketball of when they do accomplish even baseline success, that people lose their minds as far as getting excited. And I think we know why. This is still a basketball program in its history that has never won an NCAA tournament game. So when that is the highest bar of success that a program has ever reached, there are tempered expectations, but there's also monumental enthusiasm over some of the smallest accomplishments, or at least, again, baseline success.
Yeah.
When you think of football, even though we are so removed from the national championship years, that's always part of Nebraska football's history. So anything less than a certain amount of, at least a bowl eligibility, people freak out, because that's not what they feel the standard of that program should be. Baseball, to an extent, you see this as well. 2005 was their last College World Series appearance. And even with the switch from the Big 12 to the Big 10, which you and I both know, that's different baseball in the Big 12 compared to the Big 10. People still feel, well, you should be in a position to host every year. You need to be in a super regional every year, when that's not reality. There are challenges that come with it. So now we look at the challenges that are in front of this basketball program, and then where Troy Dannon comes in, and what I thought Tom did a great job of illustrating in his column is you've got now this shared revenue. You are going to be paying players like everything that remember that FBI scandal and Yahoo Sports broke that with basketball and Adidas and everything going on. All that crap is legal now. I mean, we thought basketball was going to cease to exist. I mean, oh my God, all these programs, these blue bloods, they're going to be given the death penalty. They'll never come back. They're going to have to play Division II basketball. Like, I mean, it was nonsensical. But again, the issues that were going on, this is all legal now. So how is Nebraska, how does Troy Dannon, how does the people he answers to, how do the regions, how does everybody view Nebraska basketball, men's basketball, in the pecking order of the successful programs of what you really want to invest into with NIL, with shared revenue, how you want to go about getting players? Because this was the best point I thought Tom brought up. There's something to say, a little sense of pride when you see a basketball team that maybe what they lack in overall individual explosive offensive talent, man, they're gritty. They roll up the sleeves. They punch the clock. They bring the lunch pail, whatever other cliche I can throw. And man, that's cool. And they're winning some games by doing that. They got that tough guy mentality and they're a defensive minded team. I don't know about you, Caleb, but what excited me the most of when Fred Hoiberg was named the head coach for Nebraska basketball, I think back to those Iowa State teams of George Niang and Naz Long and Matt Thomas, just shooters everywhere. And at any point, they could be down by 12 in a blink of an eye. They're up by 15 because they are just raining down threes and they are creating offense. I don't think of Fred Hoiberg as this defensive, strategist that's his identity. Now, obviously defense and that all travels. We know that, but Tom brought up a good point of maybe the reason that's been their identity is because he has been limited of what he can do when it comes to acquiring talent with what types of resources that they have compared to the peers in the Big Ten. And so you're playing the hand you're dealt right now, and you're trying to create an identity off of that. And you're trying to create a successful identity off of that. Again, the fact that Nebraska, given some of the limitations they had, was still going into that last week as a bubble team. I know we can dwell on the collapse of it, and that shouldn't be ignored. But the fact that they were still there with the limitations, I still think shows some pretty good coaching when it does come to trying to find something that you can. Now, okay, you saw that. You've got to answer the question of what type of ceiling do you want to see Nebraska basketball have? And if you want to see them be that type of team that's an NCAA tournament team 3 out of 5 years, and when they're not, that they're playing in the NIT, they're playing in the postseason, what type of commitment financially are you going to put into that? How much shared revenue is going to go into basketball? Can you shell out some extra dollars to find another Bryce Williams, to find 2 or 3 of those guys? And it costs money. Are you putting in that money? Are you comfortable doing that, especially if that could impact what you put into or what you hold back from, say, football and volleyball? The football, you cannot stop trying to invest into that. And volleyball, look, that's a machine. They've got that rolling. Okay, so is basketball going to be on the higher end of the priority list, or are you okay with, as long as you're part of the conversation? And on some selection Sundays, you're going to get the good news, and on other selection Sundays, you're going to get the bad news. But as long as you're part of the conversation, is that good enough for this basketball program, for its fan base? Are they okay from a financial standpoint of putting in the type of money that would give you that result? I guess I would think they're not, but this is now a how do you divvy up the money and give these coaches, especially a very solid, great track record. And we've been around them long enough now to know that Hoiberg's got coaching chops, that there is something to be said about that. He just needs the dudes. Well, how are you going to go about and get the dudes?
And the money is going to be a big part of that.
Yep.
That you have to have that investment. Obviously, part of it from rev share, but also part of it from the NIL outside of what you have that'll be funneled through the university. A couple of quick notes. First of all, 7 Huskers walked on senior day. All of them were transfers. Every single one of them. Even Jeffrey Grace, who's been here for a few years, he started out at Arizona State. All 7 were transfers yesterday. Last year, all 4 were transfers. The year before that, all 3 were transfers. You have to go back to Thorjar Thorbjarnason for the last Husker to come in and play their entire college career in Lincoln. The last 4-year Americans left in 2019, the final year with Tim Miles. Sam Hoiberg next year is going to be the first 4-year American to play through Nebraska since JPJ.
Yep.
Since 2019. And there were a few guys in that year. So what you're looking at in the transfer, because you only have one high school signee coming in, you have to bring in a bunch of transfers again. That's just the way the program is. And hopefully some of these young guys that are in the program now stick around multiple years, because multiple years is where you get the success. You had multiple years Derek Walker, multiple years Keisei Tominaga, multiple years Juwan Gary, Bryce Williams. And yeah, you mix in some of those others, like Sam Griesel comes in for a year. And he helps immensely with that 1 year. Rick Mast played a big role last year in his 1 year.
And then, by the way, Caleb, sorry to interrupt you. He would have been huge this year. He would have been massive this year.
It would have changed the dynamic, because you would have been able to run the offense through a high IQ passing big at the top of the key.
Right.
It just would have that's what worked the last couple of years. You didn't have it this year. Now, when you're going into the transfer portal, you have to replace a lot. 4 of your top 5 in scoring, 5 of the top 6 in rebounding, 3 of the top 4 in assists, 3 of the top 4 in steals, and your top 3 in minutes. There is a lot of room out there to go get somebody. You have Berke and Rink coming back as bigs. You probably still want to get another big. You're definitely going to want to get can you get a dynamic point guard sometime? Like someone who can score, but also they're going to pass and do really well. And you also need to get an elite scorer. I know Connor Essegian, you're hoping he can take another step and he can hit the 3 at just a high enough clip and be consistent, but you've got to go get like a dude. And I think because there will be a vacuum with so much of this production leaving,
yeah,
I think that might be enticing to someone if the dollar amount is there as well.
And that's what it comes down to. There's no question. And that's why I really appreciated what Tom put out last night is the dollars and cents. You and I have done this too, but everybody that have had the conversations about college athletics and the shared revenue, it's all been about the football conversation. And then what's left over, how do you divvy that up amongst the different sports? And every place is going to be different, because they're going to look at their next most successful sport that they have to keep rolling on top of football. And that's going to be different from school to school. Like I mentioned, how many schools are having that conversation about volleyball today? Not many. Nebraska will. Nebraska has to. Yeah, exactly. Nebraska has to, because that is a machine. And the type of eyeballs that are now on not only women's sports, but volleyball in particular, and Nebraska is at the forefront of that. You can ill afford to just assume that we can hold a little bit back, because now, based on just reputation and exposure, that program is going to keep doing what they're doing. No. All that's going to do is create competition around you where people are going to want to take Nebraska down on volleyball. So you have to stay sharp when it comes to the financial part of it.
I'm curious on that, though, Nick, because you haven't had rev share, and Nebraska volleyball has done extremely well with NIL. Mm-hmm. Like, I know they were just in an Adidas commercial for International Women's Day. Yep. You had shots from the stadium match, which is always good to see. But you've got, I think, Bergen Riley is got stuff with like Red Bull, and you've seen other players do a lot of these things. Do you think that number, when it comes out of the $20.5 or $22 million, the rev share from the school, that number could actually be pretty low? $1 million or less could potentially be zero, knowing that you do fund NIL for volleyball here really well, to where that's going to make up all of the difference. You don't need to dip into where that rev share is coming out of the school.
It's a good question. Now, this would be my counter to that, or at least my, hey, let's keep an eye on this. If, say, Nebraska did hold back from rev share and it was all NIL, which we know is very healthy, especially from Nebraska Crossing, that you would have, if there are teams, like I said, that competition that you think is going to be created because of the exposure of Nebraska volleyball. And look, I know they didn't win a national championship, but they are always going to be expected to be there. It's that competition. I think the way that you try to start taking down Nebraska is by other schools using their own rev share, whatever they can get between NIL and rev share, to get the type of players that they feel are going to be, especially within the Big Ten, that they can feel are going to take down. So I think of teams like Madison and programs like Madison and Wisconsin. I think of State College and Penn State, even up in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, because I think all of them have decisions on how committed they want to be for programs that have had a lot of success. And even if some of it has been a little bit more distant success, it's been a little bit more traditional power, but also those new teams that come in from the Pac-12 now into the Big Ten. How do they want to invest into that, knowing that Nebraska is the gold standard there? I think they would use at least as much rev share that's going to make sense to all of them. So if that was the case, if Nebraska scaled it back or didn't put as much in right away, and you start seeing other teams creep around them, and all of a sudden there's this big pool of talent where Nebraska maybe is dropping a match or two against teams that they don't typically do it, then I think obviously you have to rethink that, but have you waited too long not to keep that thing rolling? So I think it's a slippery slope. If you what you said is not wrong with the NIL part of it, but there's another financial revenue stream that if you don't at least implement that with volleyball as well, do you run the risk of teams catching you? And once they do, are you able to get right back on top? I don't know if I'd want to do that. That is a slippery slope there too. But after that, though, Caleb, after volleyball, you start looking at programs that have had variations of success. And I think most schools are going to look at their men's basketball program. Is Nebraska are they putting their men's basketball program on a pedestal as to which they will spend competitively like their Big Ten peers? Because in my opinion, you've got the coach. You don't have the up-and-coming mid-major guy anymore. You've got the coach. But there's only so much I think Fred Hoiberg can do, given his offensive background, when you don't get those types of guys, those elite scorers at least. And we just said Rink Mass. How different that – I wouldn't say Rink Mass is an elite scorer, but he's a scorer. He provides offense. He's a stretch guy. He can help you inside. He can help you outside. Just having one more guy to take a little bit of the workload off of Bryce Williams, or one more guy that you have to defend honestly, would have made a difference. So it's not like we're asking for Nebraska to spend millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to bring in 5 studs and bring in the Fab Five. No, maybe a guy or two on top of what you have in a player like a Bryce Williams would be everything I think this fan base would want to see, because I think you're finding yourself in the NCAA tournament. Yeah, maybe you're an 8 or 9 seed, but is anybody expecting more than that?
What it comes down to, and it's an open secret, Nebraska got outbid for multiple transfers this last offseason. So that's where you get some misses in the transfer portal. What it comes down to is you've got the coach, you've got the infrastructure, meaning the facilities, you have the fan base. It's time for, and this will be the first year with rev share, it's time for the university as a whole and 1890 to be serious about Nebraska men's basketball, to take this program seriously, because so far, it has absolutely not been taken seriously from that financial part in this NIL world. And that makes it kind of ties one hand behind Hoiberg's back. And I know he still has to make the decisions on where the roster is, but if there were 3 different guys he would have rather had last offseason, and not to say we don't like any of the guys who are here as people, or like, it's just, you just know that you didn't get everything you would have liked to get out of all of the transfers. But if you would have flipped out 3 guys from the transfer portal last year, you don't know what the difference is this year. You still have Alpha Bryce, and you still have Jawan Gary, and you still have Sam take another step forward. Like, you don't know what the overall difference would have been had the dollars been there. Transitioning, though, we're going to stick with basketball for just a couple of minutes here, because my college, Southern Illinois Edwardsville, is headed to the big dance for the first time in program history, it started transitioning, reclassifying to Division I in 2008. Just a few years later, the University of Nebraska at Omaha began reclassifying to Division I. And the Mavericks are now Summit League champs. As a matter of fact, they technically qualified based on their semifinal win, but they win it outright so that there's no asterisk. Proud Omaha guy, Nick Handley.
Yes.
I know there was baseball on the mind, and we were looking at where Nebraska men's basketball was. But we can still separate some of that to feel some real big pride for me in SIUE, for you with UNO. How nice is that to see these programs, both first-timers, get their shot at the big dance, even if it's in Dayton?
Well, and the SIU-Edwardsville connection in Omaha as well with Tony Baroni's son and Brian Baroni is really cool. So I know there are a lot of former Creighton Prep alum, Creighton alum that think the SIU story is very, very cool too. And I know when they were here playing Creighton, gosh, a couple of years ago, I had a chance to talk to Brian Baroni. What a great dude. And so, yeah, tip of the cap to them. For Omaha, I start with their overall leadership too, and Adrian Dowell, the athletic director there, who has been able to, I think, really get the athletic department up with the times, because hey, they're up against challenges when it comes to, FCS level type schools or those size of Division I programs that are mid majors. What are you going to do to continue to build rosters for the programs that you need to, that you want to be successful? And Omaha is, hey, they're a self-proclaimed, this goes back when Trev was there, they're a self-proclaimed hockey program, hockey school now. So you obviously have to put money into that. The bull market, their NIL, their collective there, the bull market, they've done a really good job of getting more dollars together so they can stay competitive on the ice. And they're going to be hosting home ice for the second straight year in one of the toughest conferences in all of college hockey, which is great. But for basketball, to me, maybe one of the toughest things of being such a big, Maverick fan, and for that being my school, Darren Hansen, for me, was one of the great coaches, one of the best guys on top of being a great coach. But when they parted ways with Darren, I think a lot of us understood, okay, maybe it's just time. And it was going to be really important to see who would succeed Darren Hansen. And this is why I go back to Adrian Dowell. You find a guy like Chris Crutchfield, who has connections with Dana Altman, who has connections with some great college basketball players when he was at Oklahoma as an assistant coach, who actually played both sports at Omaha as well. So a guy that was going to re-energize the fan base, not just for basketball, but also a little bit of an olive branch for the football program that no longer exists. There was a lot of interesting ways to, I think, get people back on the Omaha athletic bandwagon. And you knew this was coming at some point. Darren Hansen had that team in the Summit League finals twice. And one was a heartbreaker. Tradeon Hollins, if that shot is just maybe just a couple centimeters to the left, they're going dancing against South Dakota State. Then, of course, they lose to North Dakota State a couple of years later. But for them to see this whole thing through, and I'm with you. I'm glad you brought up that weird situation, because for people who didn't get it, St. Thomas, they're still in their probationary period, so they can't go to postseason. They can't go to the NCAA tournament. So as long as they won their semifinal game, then it defaults back to who won the regular season. Well, the Omaha men's basketball team won the regular season. So you're playing a championship game where you already know you're going, but both teams played like they wanted that. And Omaha got St. Thomas's best shot, and they still won. So there's no asterisk or anything like that. They won it outright, which is fantastic. But Chris Crutchfield, Kyan Brown, all of that entire coaching staff, they connect with those players. But I think more than anything this year, and we've all seen the trash can thing that has been made popular, they're having a lot of fun building this program under his identity. And it's very similar to what we've seen before, where they've got a lot of offense. They can get up and down the floor, but they defend at a pretty high level too. This is just a really cool thing to see for that athletic department, for this city, and for them to finally get their flowers where they've been so close before. But again, kudos to Adrian Dowell, who made that hire. And then, of course, kudos to Chris Crutchfield in building that program to an NCAA tournament qualifier in such a short time. That is not easy, especially when you're up against some of those Summit League teams, like the South Dakota States, the South Dakota. St. Thomas is now on the come as well as a new team. You got to look out for them. That they spend some money too. So, again, good on Omaha.
Yeah, St. Thomas, for those that, whether you've heard of them a lot or not, the Tommies up there in, I believe, Minnesota, they got kicked out of their conference because they were too dominant.
Yep.
At the Division III level, not the Division II level, Division III.
Yeah,
so
they skipped a division.
Yeah, so you don't have athletic scholarships. They had a massive enrollment, so tons of students. So they're bringing in a bunch of money via tuition, and they jump all the way to Division I. And yes, super competitive right away. But I do like that both teams took Sunday's game seriously, because for the Tommies, that's all you got.
Yep.
You can win a conference title and say, "Yep, we won the conference."
Yeah, you can put up a banner for that.
Like you put up the banner. You don't have an NCAA tournament to look forward to. So that was the season for them. And for Omaha, you're playing to sweep the regular season and conference titles. Like, you're absolutely playing for something. So I applaud both programs for taking it seriously. Obviously, with Omaha, that shows what can be done. It's a different level than, what Creighton's doing, what Nebraska's doing. But at all levels, to have a uniform target that you're going after, to have the right basketball coach and have an athletic director that is taking your program seriously, that is what you need to have success. And Omaha has that lined up there. I know there's still a lot of ill will and a lot of people that don't feel good about the way the Division I reclassification happened, with the dropping of football and the dropping of wrestling. I absolutely get that. I'm never going to tell people to not feel bad for those things, because there were a lot of really good local connections with those programs. That said, when you do reclassify and you do drop programs, it is with the intention to be successful in these other things. You've seen it with Omaha volleyball have some success. Obviously, hockey is that big one, but getting a basketball program into the NCAA tournament is what you point to and say, it's working out. Because that's where the dollars roll in as soon as you start getting those NCAA tournament credits. When you start getting those, and then your conference gets a win, those types of things. That's where it really starts to work out. That's what you're trying to get to in Lincoln, is get to the tournament on a regular basis and get in. But you're also getting money because you're the Big Ten Conference. Omaha doesn't have that benefit of being a multi-team league. You have one path to the tournament. It's not that large. Now, maybe if Omaha continues to build up really well and the Tommies take off, maybe you become a multi-bid league. But for what Crutchfield did this year and the fun they had doing it, that's what makes people really love you going into March. And you get to Selection Sunday next week. I think I've seen Omaha as high as a 14, actually. But most likely, depending on where things are, they'll be either the last 15, or there'll be a 16 and potentially in Dayton. I'm super excited for them. It gives us a local connection here. I'm super excited for all of my friends. That the old college group chat fired up real quick on Saturday. I'll let you know about my friends in Edwardsville.
I want to say this too for the mid-major schools, because you brought up something interesting, and I think it's right. There's just that fun element that comes with looking at lower seeds, mid-majors. And we used to have that one day, and you remember this, when we used to have the bracket busters. And it would be a week in hell. There was one time when Creighton was considered a mid-major, and Creighton played a basketball game at I think it would have been the CenturyLink Center is what it was called back then, at 11 p.m. An 11 p.m. basketball game on a Saturday night. But it was a full day of mid-majors. You got a chance to see them. It was fun. It was cool as how they branded themselves. You don't have that anymore. So what I like and this was so organic with the whole trash can thing, that thing got exposure. That was on Scott Van Pelt Sports Center. That had so much attention. You get some wrestlers involved in this thing too. And it was, again, it was organic, but the UNO marketing group, this is why I give credit to Adrian Dow too. They ran with it. They leaned in on it, and it became their thing. There was a cool factor to that. You started to see the influx of attendance at men's basketball games there towards the end of the season, where they were getting 4,000 plus. I think the last 3 home games too. So it's always one thing when you have something to play for, but when there's that cool factor, that's how I look at this men's basketball team. This Omaha men's basketball team is they created a cool factor where it's easy for everybody to jump on board, to get out to Baxter Arena and to watch this team. So when you talk about being able to make a difference and you're trying to find those dollars that you can stay competitive, at least within your conference, you start seeing those butts in the seat. That's a great place to start. And Omaha did that successfully by winning, but also having that cool factor.
I'm a no for NCAA tournament expansion. If you do add anything, if say you add 8 teams, I want there to be more avenues for the mid-majors to be there. I don't need like the way Nebraska's season ended here. We don't need teams that are in this same area having extra shots at it. I want more mid-majors. I want the Tommies in. I want more Omahas. I want the SEMOs of the world, SIUE, obviously. That's what if you do expand, it's got to be mid-majors only. I don't want more of the power conference programs. In a different power conference program, Big Ten baseball, Nebraska didn't play any of the midweek, so you didn't get a chance to kind of warm up playing back at home in the state of Nebraska with a game at Omaha or at home with South Dakota State, but you did get your home opener and conference opener all at the same time this weekend. Doubleheader on Saturday, swept by Washington, salvaged the weekend with a win on Sunday. Just your impressions of this team, where it was a rough non-conference, but if you take care of business and you win every series through the league, you got a chance to win the league and you can still maybe be in the regional hosting conversation. I don't necessarily see that happening with this team the way this first month or so has gone.
There's a lot of work to be done, and we knew that you were going into conference play already up against it with the loss of Mason McConaughey for the season. And so how do you attack the rotation? And we saw them roll out what they did. Will that change going into this weekend in California? And that road trip has now become massive. USC's come back down to life a little bit. UCLA's had some success. You hope that you can get Pepperdine. They've struggled, but it's just being on the road that long after a short little stint. Usually, Caleb, you remember when they would have their first homestand, it was typically a 2-week homestand, which I guess if you play those games last week in the midweek, maybe it feels a little bit like that. You get the 2 against Wichita State tomorrow and Wednesday, but this is a short-lived homestand for Nebraska. Well, first and foremost, they had to win yesterday.
Yeah.
And I don't even think from the standings, I mean, it's 3 games in the Big Ten right now. There's still plenty of games to be played, but I think for themselves mentally, they had to win that game. They had to just get everything that happened on that Saturday, and even some of the demons that have happened in non-conference play, and be able to at least have that to draw from. And you hope in the next 2 days that they are having success against Wichita State. The problem, and Ben and I talked about this a lot in the broadcast, is you're not seeing what they do on the mound and any success on the mound connected to maybe the play behind them defensively or to what is in the batter's box. And I'll tell you what I mean by that from an example. In the second game of that doubleheader on Saturday, Caden Brumball hits a 2-run shot. First of all, it was a great game. You're trending into one of those. It almost felt like a Friday night game. You had 2 really good pitchers, and they're throwing strikes, they're challenging hitters, and it was fun to watch.
Didn't give up any runs for the first 7 innings or 6.5 innings?
6 innings. And so you're in that situation where Caden Brumball comes up, he's got 2 strikes, and he gets into one, and all of a sudden it's 2-0, and you're thinking, okay, that was the spark Nebraska needed. They lost the first game. All right, here you go, and Will Walsh is still throwing really well. Well, you come right back out in the next inning where you need that shutdown inning. And Washington responds with a 3 spot of their own. So it's that inability to find that shutdown inning. It was that inability to get clean innings defensively when you got the first 2 batters. You get those first 2 outs, then all of a sudden it's a battle going on 3-2, and then you give up a 2-out walk. And then that walk all of a sudden gets into scoring position on a pass ball, or they just steal, and all of a sudden it's a clutch base hit here, or it's those 2-out runs that are happening. Those have been really hamstringing this team. And then on the mound, it's one thing to have the count leverage and to get ahead of hitters, but now you're starting to look at the location too, where you're seeing a lot of middle pitches in 1-2 counts, where you should be seeing a guy really having a chase maybe outside the zone, almost to the point where Nebraska pitchers have been too fine at times where they've been hittable. So there's just that level, and you heard Will Bolt talk about it, just questioning just the overall level of toughness of this team. And I think the reason he did that is because he knows, at least felt pretty confident about what he had coming in when it came to that part of it, that you shouldn't have to worry about this team. If they get hit in the face, that they will come right back with their own counterpunch. They haven't seen that as much. And so, and the thing that was a little bit more jarring this weekend than anything, and I know people might roll their eyes at this, since Will Bolt has taken over as the head coach in Nebraska, this has been one of the more elite defensive teams in college baseball. It got downright sloppy this weekend. And the reason I think some people might roll their eyes is because Washington did not handle the baseball well either. They were an error machine, but it didn't hurt them. And so they were able to play at least solid offensive baseball despite all of that. That's what you want to see Nebraska be able to do too. If they're having maybe one of those innings or just one of those games where they're not handling the baseball very well, that you got other guys in that lineup, given the amount of college innings that they've logged, that they can make up for that in the batter's box. It just hasn't happened consistently.
Nebraska opponents have more hits over these games. And so some of this, you look at what Nebraska is doing at the plate, but also what the pitching is doing, giving up more hits than your team is getting for you. 121 to 109. Nebraska has scored more runs, 6 more runs over the course of the season so far. Nebraska's pitchers have issued more walks than Nebraska has worked around, and Nebraska has struck out more at the plate than its pitchers have notched for strikeouts. Nebraska hitting 245 as a team. Nebraska's opponents hitting 273. So in all of that, weird positive to have scored more runs with all of those factors. But you're seeing that part, especially on the hits and the walks, to where you're not putting yourself in a position for success. If you're out hitting your opponent and you're drawing more walks, you're just not getting the timely hit. You're just not getting it done in the timely situation. But when you're losing both of those, it says you're not in enough situations to be getting those timely hits or those timely, even the other team getting a throwing error or something. And that was where Nebraska had to collapse two errors in an inning. And that was kind of all she wrote in one of the games this weekend.
Well, and I'll throw another number out there on Nebraska stats. I mean, after 2 games, after that Saturday alone, Washington had 10 doubles. Yeah. So it's the extra base hits as well. I talked about the inability to get that third out after getting the first 2. You get that second out, all of a sudden a guy comes up, he rips a double, he's already in scoring position. Yeah. So all of a sudden you're a single away from getting a run when you should have been out of the inning, or hopefully you could, a single, 2-out single, you can still keep him at bay. Guy can still hit, get a single himself, and you're still not scoring him from first base. So it's little things like that. And that's where I talk about just the location collectively of the pitching staff, where they've almost accounted for too much of the plate in some of those situations. And so that has been something that, and this is the other part about it, is when it comes to confidence of this team and things that can be emphasized and things that can at least be taught, I absolutely have all the confidence in the world. The guy that is teaching this pitching staff, is coaching this pitching staff, and understands it more than any of us will, is seeing that stuff too, and they're making adjustments. The question is, can you do that physically on the mound? There's only so much Rob Childress can do. There's only so much Will Bolt can do. Can those guys in the moment be able to make that adjustment, hit that spot, live on the lower half, or attack the outer half? However they want to go about each hitter, are they able to have that pitch execution? At the very least, be able to start limiting, see that trend of extra base hits come down, because that is a killer right now.
Nebraska sitting at 5-8 on the year, 1-2 in the Big Ten. A couple of non-conference games in the midweek, 6:00 first pitch, Tuesday and Wednesday, both of those against Wichita State here in Lincoln Hawks Field at Haymarket Park. And then that road swing you were talking about. Here's what each of those days is. Friday, Saturday, Sunday at UCLA, Tuesday, Wednesday at Pepperdine, then Friday, Saturday, Sunday at USC, and then Tuesday in Manhattan, Kansas. You don't even come all the way back yet before you get a stretch of home games and games inside the state's border. So that is a long road trip. That is a Major League Baseball road trip going along the West Coast, but that's what you're going to get. Baseball's first first, although they had obviously the non-con where you're in Arizona and then you're in Texas and Louisiana. I get that, but now you're doing it for conference games to where you stay through the midweek.
Yep.
This is what conference expansion is. This is where you are with that now. We will close things up. Husker Games. This was announced since our last show on Thursday. No red-white spring game for football, so Nebraska Athletics is going to change up a whole day of events on April 26th. You will be able to get a tour of the Osborne Legacy Complex. You will be able to go to what we've just been referring to as a garage sale. It's a gear and merchandise sale that you'll be able to get in there. There will also be events at Memorial Stadium. There will be a women's flag football game, and then there will be Husker football and maybe some former players and some fan engagement opportunities in what will look like the NFL Pro Bowl, where there's kind of skills competitions. You'll still be able to get into Memorial Stadium, take families around, all of that. There will be a free to get into soccer exhibition against Wyoming. Get over to Hibner. That's a phenomenal facility in what you have here, and that has been a program that has had more than a modicum of success over the last few years and put a couple of players into the professional ranks, both here and abroad. And you close it all up with Danny Bus Boom Kelly making her coaching debut at Nebraska at the Bob Devaney Sports Center, taking on Kansas, where Matt Ulmer is making his coaching debut there after several years at Oregon. That'll be the expensive one to get into. Everything else is pretty relatively priced to get families into. Your initial thoughts on, and I'll just say right away, I'm for this. I'm for this because you're not getting a football game. And I know that there will be people that are negative Nancy's on it until they get there and realize it's okay.
Yeah. Because
you have to accept, first of all, that there's not going to be a football game. Once you have that acceptance, the day seems pretty fun. Where are you at on the Husker Games?
Well, and we always find it very handy to have the pocket schedule for the upcoming football season. I feel like we need a pocket schedule for the timeline of events for this thing, because there's a lot.
That, by the way, huskermax.com and find all of the links to Nebraska on SI or si.com/college/Nebraska. You can get the links to all of that in the YouTube down below in the description. But yes, if you find that, you work your way over to the football tab. We do have the schedule in there. It's a full day, Nick. It's a full day.
It's a full day, and I think a lot of us kind of laugh because it's like, okay, what else can you throw into that day? What else? I mean, is there something we're not thinking of that you could possibly introduce to it? But in all seriousness, at the end of the day, the one thing I feel has always been a big deal about the spring game is the ability to show up at the stadium, have a little bit of some of those pregame chants and a little bit of that fanfare that you get on a regular fall Saturday afternoon. And you get a chance to experience that a little bit early. And I think that always gets people fired up for the season. And then after a while, you're watching a couple of the new additions, you're seeing how they perform, but you understand, most Nebraska fans understand that they're not necessarily performing under the most dire circumstances or the most duress because it's a controlled scrimmage environment. So the other part about what makes the spring game important is that fan engagement, is that togetherness, is getting thousands upon thousands of Husker fans in Lincoln to really embrace this football team. And with all of these things, you have a chance to still do that. And you're right. This is where you and I have talked about this. We've got to get comfortable and being uncomfortable when it comes to how we now consume the product away from the season, because college football coaches, college athletic directors all across the country are doing similar things like this, especially ones that usually have great turnouts for their spring game, of how they can protect the players, how they can abide by the wishes of their coaches, of not exposing them to potential transfer market, but also keeping the fans engaged. I will tell you this. I love the garage sale idea. That is a fantastic idea.
Number one for everybody. Everyone is all in on that, and then kind of a la carte the rest of the way. It is kind of, okay, I might, if I can afford it, I'll go to volleyball. If I want to just kind of get the family into Memorial Stadium for $10 or whatever, like a regular spring game, I'll do that. If I can afford it, I'll go to the Legacy Osborne Complex tours. I'll maybe I'll go hit up Hibner because I want to watch a little soccer. I've got soccer, and there's no Premier League on at that time. But number one for everybody is that garage sale. It's the merchandise sale, which, by the way, you do have to have a ticket. Like, you get into that for free, but you do have to have a ticket to one of the other events for that day. Here's what those are. So you have that equipment sales from 9 to 1, free admission with a purchase ticket to any of the Husker Games events. So you also have the Osborne Legacy Complex tours from 8 to noon. That's $50. The Husker Games with football tickets are $10 for adults, $1 youth, $20 in the West Club at Memorial Stadium there, where that's also got a women's flag football game. And it's got your 7-on-7 and skills contests, those things going on. 2:00 is when you'll get the Husker football activities. The soccer match, that is free admission. Mm-hmm. Volleyball starts at $10 for students, works its way up to $20, $30, $45, $60, depending on where you are. There'll also be $15 parking. So whether you go from free to the soccer up to the $60 courtside at Devaney, you have to have a ticket to something Husker Games, and you get in free to the garage sale.
Exactly. And I mean, how many times do people want, you're wearing something like, oh, is that team issued? You get team issued stuff. I mean, they're selling team issued stuff. The other thing that because I think it's going to be hilarious, we've been around a lot of the football alum in our time. We know how intense some of those guys still are. You just don't lose that. So that game, whoever is involved, it's going to get chippy. There is going to be some intensity there. So I think that's going to be fun, because that's the other thing about this fan base. We love seeing the old players that gave so much great moments in that stadium, to see them competing in their latter years. Some will be different than others when it comes to how much latter that is. I think that's going to be fun. And yeah, look, you brought up the NFL, very similar to what the NFL has done. The NFL decided to pivot too, because again, player safety concerns, that they didn't want to have a game, but they also wanted to put on some type of showcase of skills and at least provide something for the fans that were interested in still consuming that product. That's exactly what the athletic department's doing. And the access that they're trying to also allow you to have, it's going to cost money, but look, they got to make some money as well. If you want to be the football program and the athletic department that you want this thing to be, you got to be able to make a little bit of money off that. But I can tell you, seeing portions of the Osborne Legacy Complex myself, that is something that pictures do not do it justice.
Yeah.
So if you have a chance to do that, I encourage you to take advantage of all the different access that they're giving you. Now, I understand, hey, everybody has different budgets, so obviously that's something. But the best part about it is, by time you get to Lincoln in the morning to the time you'd want to go to bed and leave Lincoln, there is something going on that I think can attract a different type of the Nebraska audience. So if you're going to do something, you're going all in, you're making it big. And I'm sure they're doing all this and going to observe, hey, what worked, what didn't, what can we tweak going forward? I mean, this is the trial run for this. So we'll see what happens going forward. But I just like that you're involving your fans. You're giving them plenty of options. There's still a chance to see some football, to see the football players. You'll be able to see Dylan throw a couple of dimes here and there. You're going to be able to see what the arm looks like. There are guys you'll have a chance to get some eyes on as well. But more than anything, there's going to be sort of a fun family feel to it, which I think that really, I think that hits the nail on the head as far as this fan base and this football program. And more importantly now, an all-encompassing athletic department experience.
And hopefully next year, when it comes back around, you see what works this year, what doesn't work. Obviously, you make those changes. Hopefully, one of the baseball or softball team is not on either coast, because you guys will be. It's like, I think, Washington and Maryland.
Yep, we'll be in Maryland for that one.
Yeah, is where. So both coasts. So you don't get anything happening at Haymarket Park. Hopefully next year that can work out to where there is something that you can time out to happening out there, because I know how much fun that was to go spring game at Memorial Stadium and then people just walk over to Haymarket Park for a baseball game or a softball game that day. A couple of other notes I want to give on the weekend. Husker softball 4-0, Big Red Spring Fling. That was also their home opening weekend because they had to get stuff moved around. That's awesome to see that they've got everything rolling heading into conference, both in the circle and at the plate because it seems like everyone and their mother can hit home runs on this team, one after the other. And big congratulations to Nebraska wrestling, second at the Big Ten championships, highest finish for the team since 2020, most points scored in several years. A number of guys qualified for the NCAA championships, which don't begin this week, but next week. And you had two guys, Brock Hardy and Ridge Lovett, win Big Ten titles. For Lovett, that is back-to-back titles that he was able to win at the league level. So big congratulations to everything wrestling was able to do. I know we harp on where, say, Nebraska men's sports are, and you've seen football and basketball, the disappointing to the end of the year. Baseball, you're trying to get back to a level that seems almost unattainable from the mid and early 2000s. Yeah. But there's all the incremental ways you want to get there. But what, say, men's track has done with multiple Big Ten titles, what wrestling has done under Mark Manning, it's phenomenal. There is a lot of success around this university and in the athletic department. If you look for it, it might not necessarily be there with your big sports that are front and center that we're going to talk about the most, but there's a lot of success here in Lincoln.
Who did wrestling finish in front of in the Big Ten championships?
Iowa.
Just thought I'd throw that out there. I just wanted to remind people because after what happened yesterday.
Penn State won their bajillionth Big Ten team title in a row because guess who spends money on wrestling?
Yep.
Penn State. That is the premier program in Nebraska. Finishes second there. NCAA championships coming up. We will be back on Thursday. Hopefully we get a couple of these midweek games in, both at home for Nebraska baseball. No Nebraska men's or women's basketball happening because the women are off until Selection Sunday. So are the men. But I'm sure we will have a lot to talk about because Matt Rule is slated to speak before we have our next show on Husker Max today, right here on the Husker Max YouTube page. And you can find all of it, huskermax.com, Nebraska on SI. That is Nick Handley. I'm Kaleb Henry. We'll talk to you Thursday, 9 a.m. right here on the Husker Max YouTube page. Go Big Red.